Hello all, I'm Sai and in today's video I'm bringing to you my end of the year TBR. And if you've been observing my channel for quite a while, you might have noticed that I have not made TBRs for any of the months this year. The last TBR that I did was during the end of 2022 and after that I did not make TBRs at all because I felt like if I'm not doing TBRs, I'm reading a lot more books and it also brought down my anxiety a bit more. At the same time, I'm not a mood reader. I can decide what books I want to read and just pick them off the shelf and start reading. Despite that, I saw myself not being able to stick with the books that I put on my TBR, hence I did not do them so far this year. But I'm doing this video right now because we have just 1/4 of the year left and I have quite a few books on my shelves which are old and have been sitting on my shelf for at least like 1 or 2 years. I want to get through them as soon as I can. At the same time, I also have some really new books which I really need to read by the end of the year. So without any further ado, let's get into the books right away. The first one is a series and it is the only series in this TBR because I know that I will be starting and reading other series also. So that's not a huge problem for me. So except for this one, all the others in this video are going to be standalone ones. So the only series is the Serpent and Dove trilogy by Shelby Mahurin. I bought the second and third books during some sale in the first half of the year and I got them for really cheap prices. And I just went forward and bought the first book because I know that I want to read the series by the end of the year. Some of you guys have also been asking me to read this ever since 2021. So it has been long due. At the same time, it's a YA fantasy series that also has a lot of romance in it. So if I'm not wrong, this is not just fantasy but romantasy, which is a combination of both genres. I usually don't gravitate towards stories that have romance as the primary element to them, but I think this will be done well because seeing that a few people on BookTube whom I trust a lot enjoy this series and the books are also not that big, so I'll probably be able to binge through this series pretty soon. Let's just hope that I end up liking it. The next one is a literary fiction and it's probably the biggest of all the books in this TBR, and I've also almost got through half of this book, and it is Tomb of Sand by Geetanjali Shree. Now this is the International Booker Prize winner for 2022 and that's the only reason why I wanted to read this book. You can see that it's pretty huge, right? And I've gotten through one half of the book and I have another half of it left and I've not even touched this book for the past 2 months. But I do remember where I left the story off, so I'll be able to continue it pretty easily compared to the other books which have been sitting on my shelf for quite a while now. Now the problem with this book is that it has really good writing, but we get the story for like 10 pages and after for 20 to 30 pages we just go on and enjoy the beauty of words and all the things that are surrounding the people inside the story. It is good in a way for me because I do like that kind of immersive writing. At the same time, it's a bit bad because it is distracting me and taking me out of the story at multiple points, and it is taking a lot more time to just get back to the story and follow it properly without forgetting stuff. I've also been doing the audiobook of this one parallelly with the physical copy, so I'll probably be able to finish it by the end of the year and I just hope so. If any of you have finished reading this book and have some tips for me, please do let me know down in the comments because I could really use some help for reading this book. The next one is a Tamil book and it's also technically a series because it has 2 books in it. I have the bind-up of it and it is Paathivan Kanavu by Amarar Kalki. I read Ponniyin Selvan last year and I read Sivagamin Sabadam in the beginning of this year. After reading both of those things, I have to read this one because they are all kind of prequels and sequels to one another and they are also based on Tamil history. I for sure know that if I start reading this book, I'll be able to finish reading it in just like 2 or 3 days max because I know Kalki's writing style and how much addictive it is for me as a person. He has read this one and he says that it is better than Sivagamin Sabadam but not as good as Ponniyin Selvan. My mother has read both Ponniyin Selvan as well as Sivagamin Sabadam like me, but she has not read this one. So I'm trusting my brother's words with this one and I'm going to try and start reading it as soon as I can. Also, it is pretty short compared to the other books which I've talked about so far in the video, so I'll be able to read this faster than them. The next one is a standalone fantasy and I wantedly did not read this until this point inside the year because I wanted to read this during a nice and cold season, and the book is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. I read The Night Circus 2 years back in October of 2021. And I personally did not like that book at all for some reason. Not some reason, there are many reasons for it. I'll try to link my review video of The Night Circus in the description. You can go forward and check it out if you are interested. I did not like the book as a whole because it did not have a plot or any sort of character development. But the writing of the author and the ambience of the book was just out of the world. And I'm clearly going into this book without any expectations in terms of the story or the characters. I'm just going in for the vibes and the beautiful writing of the author because I know that she cannot disappoint me in that aspect. And I've also heard really good things about because I also saw that some people did not like The Night Circus but they ended up liking this one just by adjusting the expectations based on the experience from The Night Circus. And this will definitely have a dedicated review once I finish reading it. The next one is another big book and it is The Glass Palace by Amitav Ghosh. Now, the reason why I want to read this book is because I read another book by this author as an audiobook during the first quarter of the year, and I did like the writing style of the author in that one. More than the writing style, I can say that I liked his narration of the story. And I'm going into this book based on that experience alone, because it is also an award-winning book. You can see that the book is a bit big and the print inside the book is very, very tiny, so it will take a lot of time for me to read. I found the audiobook of this one on Storytel, so I'll be listening to the audiobook and following on with the physical copy because it's much more easier and more enjoyable for me as an experience. So if I end up liking this one, I can go back and read those books also, because I know that he is one of the most sought after authors here in India. It is definitely a big book, but I believe that I'll be able to finish this pretty soon. The next one is also technically a series, but I'm not considering it as a complete series because it's mostly a collection of short stories that were published in the order of a series, and it is obviously the Sherlock Holmes series by the Arthur Conan Doyle. I've been reading Sherlock Holmes ever since the March of 2021, and I've not gotten to the end of the series yet. I think I have like 2 or 3 more books inside the series left to read, and I have the audiobook collection narrated by Stephen Fry on Audible. Now, this book which I'm holding has like 1 or 2 more stories which I've not read, and there are also 1 or 2 more short story collections which I've not read, but I have all of them as physical copies with me, and I also have the audiobook. The narration of Stephen Fry inside the series is just excellent, so I'm definitely going to listen to the audiobook again and follow on with the physical copies. And I'd also suggest that audiobook collection to anyone who wants to start reading the Sherlock Holmes series, because the narration of Stephen Fry, especially in that particular audiobook, is just great and out of the world. It will just transport you back into England during that time and make you experience the story along with Sherlock and Watson. I'm not sure whether I'll be able to finish the series by the end of the year or not, but I'm definitely going to make an effort to try and get as much as possible since I have all the resources. The next one is the first book inside a YA dystopian series, and I've been wanting to read this series for at least 4 to 5 years now. And more than anything, I want to get to this book by the end of November at least. And the book is The Knife of Never Letting Go by Patrick Ness, which is the first book inside the Chaos Walking trilogy. I just have the first book with me, I don't have the second and third books, but I'm pretty sure that I'm going to enjoy the series because I have not rated any of the Patrick Ness books that I've read so far less than 4 stars at all, because for some reason his books are sad, yet I do end up liking them so much. They are very emotional in their tone and they're mostly sad than happy, and they all have this kind of supernatural element going on with them, which are really well done by the author. I'm not sure whether this has any supernatural element or not, but I've heard some really interesting things about the formatting of this book as well as the writing of the author in this one in specific. If it is not obvious enough, I cannot wait to read this one. The next one is another literary fiction book, but I think it's also historical fiction. And the only reason why I want to read this book is the author, and the book is The Lowland by Jhumpa Lahiri. Of all the Jhumpa Lahiri books that I have on my shelves, this is the only book which I have not read yet. And I can also say that of all the Jhumpa Lahiri books that are out there, this is the only one which interests me the least. I want to read all of her other books, but just because I have this on my shelf, I want to get through this first and then move on to the other books. The subject in this book feels a bit too dry and more sad for my taste, if you ask me, particularly at this point of time. But I want to get to reading this book because I know that Jhumpa Lahiri's writing in this book will also be just as good as in any of her other books. And if I'm not wrong, this is the only fiction book by her which I have not read so far. And all the others which are out there are non-fiction books. I might be wrong, okay, I'm just saying based on some little knowledge that I have about the author. So my thought is that if I get through this book by the end of this year, I can buy all of the rest of her books in the beginning of next year and try to binge through them. So let's wait and see if I'm going to read this or not. The next one is a Greek mythology retelling, and it is also kind of a standalone fantasy book. I have tried reading this book twice before, but for some reason I did not feel connected with the book at all, even though I like the writing of this author so much. And the book is super popular, which is Circe by Madeline Miller. I have read the other 2 books by the author, The Song of Achilles as well as Galatea, but I have not gotten to this yet, okay? I think I've read like 6 or 7 chapters of Circe so far during both of my attempts in reading the book, but for some reason I'm not able to connect to the story at all, and it is also quite confusing for me because I don't have knowledge of Greek mythology. But I'm definitely confident with this author that I will end up liking the book if I finish reading it. So I want to make an effort and try and finish reading Circe by the end of the year. And I know that it is a sad book since it's a Greek mythology retelling and they are all tragedies. I have heard no one talking anything negative about this book ever at any place inside the book internet, so the expectations on this one are sky high, and I sincerely hope that I end up liking this. Those were all the fiction books, so I'm going to talk about the non-fiction books now, of which the first one is Influence the Psychology of Persuasion by Robert B. Cialdini. I've actually started reading this book like 2 to 3 months back, and I read the first chapter of the book, It was very interesting, but after that, for some reason, I just lost momentum and I did not continue on with the book. The first chapter itself gave a lot of insight for me because it made me understand how I was manipulated at instances, even though it did not cost me much, and how to understand it better in order to avoid letting it happen to me again in the future. It's definitely an interesting and useful book, and I'm saying this from my experience from just reading the first chapter alone. So I really have very high hopes for this one, and you can see that it's quite a big book, so it will take a little bit of time for me to read. And my plan is to finish reading all of the non-fiction books that I'm talking about in this video by the end of October, so that I can recommend them to you guys for non-fiction November if they end up being good. So I'm going to try and prioritize them over the fiction books for October. The next one is Daring Greatly by Brené Brown, which is a book about being vulnerable and trying to make yourself more vulnerable and open so that people can understand you better. In the book haul video where I talked about this book itself, I have said that this is one book which is very frightening for me to read because just like most people out there, it is very difficult and frightening for me also to be vulnerable with anyone. And more than that, I am a very introverted person. Despite that, I have noticed that there are multiple instances in my life itself where I have felt a lot more connected and close to people when I've shared some personal things about my life with them having trust in them. It has worked in a good way as well as not worked in a good way at multiple instances. But I have noticed that when it has worked well, those relationships have been very powerful and deeper in my life compared to the other ones. Now, this is a very short book, so I know that it will not take that much time for me to finish reading this book. Despite that, I am frightened just because of the content of the book, because it is something that I'm naturally frightened of. So let's just hope that I eat that frog and finish reading this first. The next one is a mythology book, and it is Shyam, an illustrated retelling of the Bhagavata by Devdutt Patnaik. Again, I have started reading this book. I think I started reading it last year, and in all these months, I've just gotten through 1/3 of the book. I have 2/3 left. And it's not like this is the first book that I'm reading from this author also. I have read multiple of his books before this one, but the thing is that I've read all of them on Kindle and I've not read them as physical copies. So this is basically the first book from him that I'm reading as a physical copy, and it also has a ton of illustrations that are drawn by the author himself. Each and every one of the illustrations are just so beautiful, okay? They are like a reflection of our culture and they are done in the most simple yet intricate fonts possible. Each and every illustration that I've come across so far in this book have been breathtaking for me, and they have been very heartwarming also. I know for a fact that I'll not be rushing through this book no matter what happens because I want to relish it. Despite that, I just hope that I end up finishing this by the end of the year. Let's just cross our fingers and hope it happens. The next one is 8 Rules of Love by Jay Shetty. I've read the first book by Jay Shetty when it got released, which is Think Like a Monk, and I did like that book a lot. Okay, it's not like I agreed with everything that the author talked about in that book, but it was quite different from all the other non-fiction books that I've read in that particular category. And I hope that this also ends up being like that because it's a book about love, and I'm not sure whether it deals with just the romantic kind of love or if the term love is used to encompass all the types of love that we feel and express towards people. If it's just about romantic love, I'm sure that I will get fed up with the book. But if it's not just like that, and if it encompasses all the other kinds of love also, I'm sure that this will be a treat for me. And the title of the book is also quite strong. It says 8 Rules of Love, like we have to follow these 8 things in order for our love to be successful. I have a lot of thoughts on this book. Let's just wait and see how I feel about it once I finish reading it. The next one is a personal finance book, and it is Let's Talk About Money by Monica Helen. Now, I've heard a lot of great things about this book, okay? Especially from booktubers who have read this during the time it got released. And if I'm not wrong, the edition that I have has some additional tips after the COVID pandemic in order to protect ourselves from such financial situations and crises that we can deal with when it comes to pandemics and times during which we cannot just go out of our home and do some kind of work in order to earn money. And since it's also written by an Indian author, I'm sure that it will be perfect for our kind of economy, and it will help me understand the amount of money that I'm making and where I'm like putting it down the drain and where I'm using it properly. Again, it is quite a short book, and the author has written a second book as a companion for this one also. So once I finish reading this one, I'll definitely buy that one also and read it. And finally, the last book in this TBR video is The Courage to Be Happy by Ichiro Kimishi and Fumitake Koga. I read the first book by these two authors, which is The Courage to Be Disliked, last year, and it was a very confronting yet super useful read for me, okay? And I'm sure that I want to reread that book before getting to this one. So I'm going to try and reread it as soon as I can so that I get into this book with the proper experience of the writings of the authors, because it was quite difficult for me to get through while I read that book for the first time. So I'm excited as well as a bit frightened to read this one. So yes guys, those are all the books on my end of the year TBR. And if you have read any of these books, please do let me know down in the comments how they are and what I can expect from them. At the same time, if you have any particular tips for any of the particular books that I've talked about, please drop them also down in the comments because it will be helpful for me. And if you have an end of the year TBR, drop that also down in the comments so that we can try and read certain books which are similar in our TBRs together. And if you did enjoy watching today's video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and also share it to your friends. If you want to get more content from me, do subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching and have a great rest of your day.